They say that control is a kind of illusion, a comfort we grant ourselves in a world designed to surprise us. No one knew that better than Alexander Sterling. From the outside, his life was immaculate, a penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, a tech empire under his name, and a calendar micromanaged to the second. But control can't replace connection, and in moments of silence, even the most powerful can feel hollow. Alex was no stranger to winning. He knew how to read a room, dominate a board meeting, and walk away from mergers with a smirk. But right now, standing alone in his penthouse, waiting for a woman he'd never met, a stranger who was supposed to pretend to love him, he felt anything but victorious. He glanced at his watch again, a Patek Philippe gleaming in the dim light. 5 minutes late. Oddly, that bothered him more than it should have. This entire setup, ridiculous as it seemed, wasn't born from impulse. It was strategy. His younger brother's wedding was approaching, a sprawling weekend affair in Lake Forest, filled with old money, newer egos, and an ocean of expectations. Their mother, Eleanor Sterling, had made her intentions crystal clear. She expected Alex to attend, of course, and preferably with someone who could be a wife, or at the very least someone who could become one. Eleanor never demanded, she orchestrated. Her matchmaking was legendary and exhausting. Complicating matters further was the confirmed attendance of Victoria Vance, the woman Alex had once thought he'd marry. Brilliant, composed, lethal. Their relationship had ended in frost. Seeing her again, especially without an emotional buffer, would be a recipe for disaster. So Alex did what any cornered CEO might do: he outsourced the problem. Enter Isabelle Rossy. His assistant Sarah Jenkins, unflappable and eerily well-connected, had handled the arrangement. Alex's requirements had been specific. The woman must be intelligent, articulate, attractive, but not flashy, able to adapt in high society situations, and above all, not complicated. A woman who could memorize a script, smile convincingly, and disappear by Monday morning with a generous wire transfer. What he didn't expect was the woman who walked in when the elevator chimed. She was late, yes, but she was calm, collected, and completely unlike the women he usually encountered in boardrooms or ballroom galas. No expensive jewelry, no haute couture, a simple navy dress, modest heels, and a leather-bound notebook clutched in her hand like armor. Her chestnut hair fell in soft waves, slightly windblown, and her eyes, an arresting shade of forest green, met his with steady curiosity. "Mr. Sterling," she said, voice clear, neutral. "Izzy Rossi," Sarah interjected, stepping beside her. "Your fiancée for the weekend." Alex blinked. Then unexpectedly he smiled. It wasn't rehearsed. He extended a hand. "Call me Alex." She took it. Her grip was firm but not aggressive. "Then you can call me Izzy." It was in that moment, that unassuming, perfectly forgettable moment, that everything began to shift. They sat and Sarah reviewed the logistics: travel itinerary, cover stories, shared history. Alex listened, but only partially. His eyes kept returning to Izzy. She wasn't stiff. She didn't seem nervous. In fact, she was flipping through her notebook, nodding occasionally, as though she were preparing for a presentation. He liked that. It made him feel less like a client and more like a partner. What he didn't know was that Izzy was doing math in her head. Her rent was overdue. Her grandmother's bookstore, the Story Nook, was on the verge of bankruptcy. She'd picked up freelance illustration work wherever she could, but art didn't pay in regular intervals. The offer had come at the precise moment desperation crossed paths with pride. Sarah's email was discreet but firm: 3 days, generous compensation, strictly professional. Izzy had conditions: no contact beyond what was necessary, no photos beyond stage moments, no risk to her reputation. Sarah had agreed, and now here she was, sitting in a penthouse with a man who looked like he belonged on magazine covers, wondering what the hell she'd gotten herself into. The next morning, they boarded a black sedan headed for Lake Forest. The car was quiet at first. Alex buried himself in emails. Izzy watched the trees blur past her window, autumn colors bleeding into each other like brushstrokes. She opened her notebook and began sketching not him, not the landscape, but something abstract. Shapes, curves, movement. "You draw?" he asked without looking up. She paused. "Illustrator, children's books, mostly contract work." He nodded. "We use illustrators for our product UI sometimes, mostly digital." "Not the same thing," she replied gently. "Your design tells people how to use a product. Mine tells people how to imagine one." He glanced up. That was not the answer he expected. "That's poetic." She shrugged. "Just honest." At the resort, things moved quickly. They were ushered to their suite. 2 rooms joined by a sitting area stocked with champagne and a handwritten note from the bride. Izzy took it in stride. She admired the view, hung up her dress, and laid out her makeup brushes on the vanity. Not because she cared about looking perfect, but because rituals calmed her. The welcome dinner was their first real test. Izzy wore a sleeveless emerald green gown that made her eyes glow. Alex, in a sharp gray tux, offered his arm with surprising sincerity. As they entered the ballroom, dozens of heads turned. Cameras clicked. The sterling heir had arrived. With someone. They made their rounds. Izzy smiled when prompted, laughed when expected. But it wasn't robotic. She listened, asked good questions. She knew how to deflect with grace. When one guest asked if she came from old money, she replied with a laugh, "Only if you count antique bookstores as assets." Even Alex was impressed. She wasn't just surviving, she was adapting. Later that night, as they sat on the balcony with drinks in hand, he said, "You were remarkable." Izzy turned to him. "You mean I didn't embarrass you in front of Chicago's elite?" "No," he said, serious now. "I mean you held your own." "That's rare." She looked at him for a long moment. "You don't talk to people like this, do you?" He hesitated. "Like what?" "Like they matter more than the performance." He didn't answer. He didn't need to, because in that pause he realized she was right. The second day of the wedding weekend brought sunshine, formal brunches, and more people watching them than either of them were used to. To the outside world, they looked perfect, coordinated, engaged in love. But inside, something deeper was beginning to stir. Not scripted affection, not method acting, but something honest. They shared stories over coffee on the terrace. Izzy told him about the time she got lost in a used book fair and ended up sleeping under a poetry table. Alex told her how his father once grounded him for skipping out on a Harvard interview to attend a street photography workshop in Prague. These weren't stories meant to impress. They were admissions, cracks in the walls. What made their connection rare was not just compatibility, but how neither of them tried to win. In a world where love is often about who can give less, who can withhold emotion longer, here were two people learning how to simply show up, to tell the truth, even if it scared them. That night, the rehearsal dinner unfolded with champagne flutes and silver cutlery, but beneath the glittering lights and jazz trio tension simmered. Victoria Vance arrived fashionably late. She wore red, not crimson, not burgundy, but stop sign red, the kind of color that demanded attention. Her smile was polite, but her eyes were knives. When she walked up to Alex and Izzy, time slowed. For just a moment, you could feel the past pressing into the present. "Alex," she purred, leaning in for an air kiss. "You didn't tell me you were bringing someone so artistic." Izzy extended a hand. "Isabelle Rossy. It's a pleasure." "Of course it is," Victoria replied, eyes narrowing slightly. "And what do you do, Isabelle?" I'm an illustrator and bookstore owner, or a bookstore survivor, depending on the day, Izzy answered with grace and humor. Victoria smirked. How charming. I do love a woman with a story, and just like that, the war began. Over the next 24 hours, Victoria watched, observed, and collected. She wasn't convinced. Something about Izzy didn't fit. Not in the usual socialite way. No Ivy League background. No foundation galas. No LinkedIn history, screaming connections and pedigree. She was too polished not to be real, and that made her suspicious. The wedding morning came with golden sun and floral arrangements strung across white chairs on the lakeshore. As Michael and his bride exchanged vows, Alex reached for Izzy's hand. It was supposed to be for show, but the way his thumb brushed over her knuckles felt unscripted. She didn't pull away, but peace was short-lived. At the reception, under a canopy of fairy lights and strings of cello music, Victoria made her move. She waited until the cake had been cut, until the champagne had dulled the edges of tension, and then she struck. Isabelle, she said loudly enough for the nearby guests to hear. Funny thing, I came across an email thread earlier this week. Seems your little engagement is more of a business transaction. Silence fell. Victoria held up her phone. On the screen, a screenshot of correspondence between Sarah Jenkins and the mutual contact who'd introduced Izzy. 3-day arrangement. $25,000, posing as fiancée, she read aloud. Tell me, Alex, does your mother know she's hugging an actress? A gasp escaped from somewhere behind them. Izzy froze. Not from guilt, but from fear. This wasn't just embarrassment. This was annihilation, her character, her dignity all dissected before strangers. Her throat tightened. Her chest caved in. Then she heard it. Alex's voice. I know, he said. Victoria blinked. What I know, he repeated. I hired her. I asked her to pretend. Because I was tired. Tired of matchmaking. Tired of being watched. Tired of pretending I was fine. He turned to face the crowd, now gathering eyes wide with curiosity. But somewhere between the performance and the lies, I found something real. I fell in love with Isabelle. Not because she played a role, but because she stopped being a role. She was the first person in years who saw me. Not my title, not my money, just me. Izzy's eyes filled with tears. But this time they weren't tears of fear. They were something else, something terrifying and beautiful. Victoria, red lips trembling, scoffed. You can't be serious. Alex looked at her calm and firm. I've never been more serious. For the first time, the crowd turned away from Victoria. The power she wielded vanished like smoke. Eleanor Sterling approached, heels clicking sharply on marble. Alexander, is this true? She asked, voice low. It is, he replied. Eleanor turned to Izzy, appraising her like a priceless auction item. And you, Izzy, took a breath. I didn't expect this. I didn't expect him. But yes, what started as a job became something real. Eleanor paused. Then, to everyone's surprise, she nodded once. Then let's hope it stays that way. She walked away, leaving murmurs in her wake. Later that night, long after the guests had left, Alex found Izzy standing by the lake. Her hair was pinned up, her shoes were off. She looked like something out of a dream, not perfect, just real. You didn't have to say what you said, she whispered. I wanted to, he replied. I needed to. She looked at him, tears shining under moonlight. So what now? He stepped closer. Now we write our own story. No contracts, no timelines, just honesty. She smiled. It wasn't the polished smile of a performance. It was soft, unsure, hopeful. And for the first time in a long time, Alex didn't feel like a CEO. He felt like a man standing at the edge of something honest. Monday came faster than either of them wanted. The weekend at the lake faded like a memory, too good to be real. the kind that doesn't quite feel like it belonged to your own life. But as the car pulled up in front of Alex's penthouse, the illusion didn't dissolve. It settled. It transformed into something quieter, something that stayed. They didn't say goodbye, not formally. Izzy gathered her sketchbook and her small overnight bag, paused at the door and looked back. This doesn't have to end here, Alex said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. It already changed everything, she replied. He nodded, and that was enough. In the days that followed, Alex tried to slip back into the life he had mastered: early board meetings, strategy decks, investors with questions, markets that never slept. But everything felt off. The same view, same espresso, same tailored silence, but none of it filled the space she left. He caught himself checking his phone, wondering if she'd call, debating whether to show up unannounced. He didn't, not at first. Meanwhile, in Wicker Park, Izzy was back behind the counter at the Story Nook. Business was slow, bills weren't, but something had changed in her too. Her sketches had more motion, her emails were more confident. The world hadn't become easier, just clearer. She didn't feel like a background character anymore. She felt written in bold. A week later, she was trying to rearrange a sagging bookshelf when the doorbell jingled. Careful, a familiar voice said, "That one looks like it's about to fall and sue someone." She froze, turned. Alex Sterling stood in her doorway, not in a suit but in a soft sweater and jeans, carrying nothing but a slightly lopsided grin. "I came to see you," he said. "Not the polished version, just this." She didn't reply immediately. Her guard was up, but her heart had already decided. He helped her fix the shelf. They didn't talk about Lake Forest, or contracts, or money. They talked about books, about how she learned to draw emotion before anatomy, about how he secretly wrote poetry in college and never told a soul. That afternoon, Alex made her a quiet proposal. Sterling Innovations had a community fund largely unused that could support neighborhood education. What if they built a children's story program, weekend readings, art workshops, free books, a website to support local authors? "I'm not asking as a CEO," he said. "I'm asking as a man who believes in what you're building." She looked around the dusty old shop, the smell of paper and memory. And then she looked at him, sleeves rolled up, knees dusty, eyes full of something she hadn't seen before in any one investment, not in profit, but in her. "Yes," she whispered. The next few months became a blur of transformation: new signage, cozy beanbags for kids, local writers donating copies. Sarah helped design the branding. Michael and Chloe brought their nieces. Eleanor dropped by one Saturday with a donation and a comment that the lighting was surprisingly warm. That was her way of approving. But the biggest shift wasn't the storefront. It was them. Alex stopped performing his life and started living it. He still worked, he would always work, but he smiled more, laughed genuinely with his team, took calls on the walk over to the bookstore just so he could say good morning to Izzy before opening hours. And Izzy, she wasn't the girl pretending. She was the woman running a business, shaping young minds and falling in love slowly without fear. One Sunday evening, after the last child had gone home with a painted bookmark, they sat together on the floor, a warm lamp overhead, a record playing Billie Holiday in the background. "You changed everything," she said quietly. "No," Alex replied, taking her hand. "You reminded me how to feel again." She looked up at him, smiling. "You think this started with a fake engagement, but really it started the moment you saw me as more than a solution," and she was right. Because sometimes the roles we pretend to play reveal more truth than the ones we think we own. We hide behind jobs, titles, filters, but in those quiet moments when we're forced to show up unscripted and unsure, that's where real connection lives. Let's pause here for a moment, Because this story, like many fictional romances, feels like a dream, but it's not so far from reality. Think about how often we perform in real life. We show up to dinner pretending we're okay. We attend work meetings with practiced enthusiasm. We go on dates rehearsing lines we've used 100 times. We wear masks to be accepted, to avoid risk, to maintain image. But the most meaningful relationships, romantic or not, don't begin with perfect timing or a flawless resume. They begin when we allow someone to see the unedited version of us, the part we keep hidden, the version we assume isn't enough. Izzy didn't have connections or legacy. She had integrity, curiosity, and strength. Alex didn't need another polished socialite. He needed truth, vulnerability, someone who made him feel like a human being again, not just a brand. So what can we take away from all this? First, that authenticity is magnetic. You don't have to be extraordinary to be unforgettable. You just have to be real. Second, that love is not an equation to solve. It's a risk, a messy, beautiful, unpredictable risk. But if you take it, if you're brave enough to show someone your unfiltered self, it might just change your life. And finally, that sometimes the best stories begin not when we chase perfection, but when we let go of control. Alex Sterling thought he needed a woman to complete the picture. What he found instead was a woman who tore up the picture and helped him draw a new one. Imperfect, vivid, and entirely his. And Izzy. She didn't just get to save her bookstore. She got to rewrite her narrative. Not as the struggling artist, not as the fake fiancé, but as the hero of her own story. So here's to every story that begins with a lie and ends with the truth, to the roles we play and the selves we find underneath, and to the possibility that love, the real kind, shows up when we stop acting and start listening. Because sometimes the smallest gestures, the quietest moments, and the most unexpected partnerships lead us home. Please share these stories with your friends and family and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more meaningful stories.